Hi, I'm Amy Etchison, Interim Director of SIU Press. In a biography that reads like a novel, author Andrea Ross chronicles the life of a woman who helped shape Chicago, from donating the land for Brookfield Zoo to bankrolling the Chicago Opera. But like too many, Edith Rockefeller McCormick was a woman forgotten by history. Edith was a powerhouse. She rejected the limited gender role carved out for her by society and defied the expectations of her tycoon father, John D. Rockefeller. I had the chance to interview Andrea and dive deeper into her book, Edith, the Rogue Rockefeller McCormick. We're sharing the interview as a three-part series, starting with a closer look at Edith's rise and fall as the richest woman in America.
I feel that Edith is a bit of a patron saint here for Chicago, yet nobody knows about her. So that was my mission in writing this. And I had read that she once declared she had been King Tut's child bride in a previous incarnation. And I read that she spent tremendous amounts of money to have her horoscope read. And I thought, well, here's a great juicy character I can write about. But somewhere along the line that changed, and I realized that she had kind of been gypped of her position in Chicago history. And it became about that for me, about kind of rescuing another woman from this scrap heap of history.
Well, first of all, can you tell us a little about Edith Rockefeller McCormick and just who she was and why she was notable?
Yeah, well, I mean, to start with, so she was a daughter of the oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller. So when she came to be of marrying age, all eyes were on her, right? And she ended up marrying a family friend, Harold Fowler McCormick. He was the heir of the McCormick Reaper. So, two powerhouse families, absolutely. And I mean, the newspapers love the story, Princess of Standard Oil to wed right. Prince of McCormick Reaper. And the newspapers all estimated that at the time of her wedding, she would become the richest woman in the country.
You mentioned her husband, Harold McCormick. Early in their marriage, they lived in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I think you said for the first 2 years of their marriage, while he was learning the family business of farm equipment sales. And she described those years as the happiest of her life. Can you tell us more about that time in their lives and why she was so happy in Iowa?
Yeah, well, I think it was such a hopeful time, right? I mean, here they'd just gotten married. I guess to understand it, you have to realize that Edith's childhood was not what most people picture a Rockefeller upbringing would be like. Her childhood was one mainly of restraint and denial. It was a very Baptist household. There was a lot of prayer. Everything surrounded the church and duty. That was what the family spoke about. There was very little gaiety of any sort. Dancing was forbidden. Card playing was forbidden. So what was really forbidden was spending. So Edith and her siblings would earn pennies by pulling weeds or by practicing their musical instruments or fixing things around the house or whatever. But this was not meant for spending. It was meant for the church plate, and it was meant to be saved. So when Edith married Harold, all of a sudden, all of the rules were lifted. And here they were in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and they could spend, right? They had these two fortunes and really probably very little understanding of how much money that was, right? Mm-hmm. But they spent almost, as if their pockets were bottomless. They were the it couple, right? And up and coming, and here we go, right? And later on, reality would set in, and
right. And part of that reality was you talking about that little boy, Jack, their oldest. Part of the reality was, him dying of smallpox. Was it
scarlet fever?
Scarlet fever,
right?
When he was 4.
Right. So their first child was John Rockefeller McCormick. And he died at the age of 4 of scarlet fever, which devastated them.
Right.
Their second child, Fowler, also came down with scarlet fever at that time, but did not pass from it. Then they had 3 girls after that, Muriel, Editha, and Mathilde. And Editha also, she died before her first birthday. So those 2 events, in conjunction with all of the pressures that Edith was feeling at that point, were too heavy a weight for her to bear, I think. I mean, growing up Rockefeller sounds great, but the reality of it is that people hate you. At least at that point they did. Father, McClure's magazine was running all these issues written by Ida Tarbell about how awful John D. Rockefeller was. You might wake up to find a front page editorial cartoon with Father in there. So they were hated. And all of the Rockefeller children developed nervous ailments of one type or another. And honestly, none of them ever fully recovered. Her daughters came over to Switzerland with her, and her son came over initially, but then came back here to study and went somewhat back and forth. So it was a very divided family, and she really was not doing any mothering during that entire time period. Yeah.
Right. And even before she left, when they were in Chicago and she was so busy with all of her civic and social engagements, it seems like she didn't have a lot of time with her children then either.
Oh, I have to tell you, this is something that I really struggled with too as a biographer, because I remember distinctly the moment that I realized that Edith and Harold hosted a huge garden party at the end of June or beginning of June, a huge event with just, they trucked in all this foliage and they had all these lights out in their garden. And it was a huge event that was written up in the newspapers. And when I put together the fact that her daughter, Editha, died a few days later, and that she was about 15 miles north of the mansion, under the care of physicians. But that was happening while they were partying. I mean, that took my breath away. And it took me some time to wrap my mind around this, to kind of get over my anger, because I'm a mother and I can't imagine just neglecting your children as she did.
Right.
But in Edith's case, the expectations on a mother with her standing in society were very different than our expectations of mothering today. So her role at that point would have been to hire the very best nurses and the very best governesses and to oversee them and make sure they were doing their job so that she could fulfill her duty, which was more civic minded. So yes, I have struggled with that. Edith was not a good mother. She just wasn't. Her decorating scheme was somewhat eclectic as well. I mean, she just kind of threw it all together, right? It wasn't like this was the Chinese room and this was the French room and she just, whatever worked. But in her defense, what she was doing is assembling a collection that was intended to be a museum for the city of Chicago. In her first will, it was specifically stated that both her mansion at 1000 Lakeshore Drive, as well as her summer house up in Lake Forest, would become museums for the public. And in fact, the one at Lakeshore Drive was intended to be expanded and become a mayor's mansion and museum. So did she enjoy these things? Absolutely, particularly things that had lineage. Anything that had been in royal hands, she was very interested in. But her ultimate goal was to bring these grand treasures to Chicago for the people of Chicago to enjoy, which goes back to her notion of duty.
So you mentioned that you know a lot about these items from the auction catalog. And that brings us to such a sad part of her story, is that everything she had to be auctioned away.
Right.
And those plans for her homes, her two beautiful, big, beautiful homes, full of these amazing collections that she had spent her life curating, were sold. I don't know what happened to the houses. And yeah, I got on Google Maps and I looked at 1000 Lakeshore Drive and I did the street view, and it looks like there are condos there now. And I zoomed in and I couldn't even see a historical marker anywhere.
Right.
What happened to these plans? You know, she wanted these houses to be museums full of all these things that she had collected, but it seems like now the houses are gone and all of her things were auctioned.
Yes. Well, so to back up for a bit, right? So when she married, they said she was the richest woman in the country, right? When she died, she was practically penniless. Mm-hmm. So what happened in between is when she came back from Zurich, she started a real estate company with her friend that she brought back from Zurich, Edwin Krenn. Nobody quite knows the extent of that relationship. Whether they were lovers or just friends, we don't know. But in any case, he was by her side for the remainder of her life, which is more than we can say for anybody else in her life. So together with Edwin and another friend, an old childhood friend of Edwin's, Edward Dado, they started a real estate firm called Krenn and Dado, with Edith providing the money for it, and Edwin and Edward running it, managing it. This went really well for a while. So this was early 20s, and they gobbled up land like you would not believe, particularly along the new L lines in Chicago. So they were smart about it, and they knew that those L lines would take people away from work and to their home in no time flat. So that was what they did, and these things sold. So they owned millions and millions of dollars worth of land. And all was going great, and they were developing and selling. And then the real estate market started to slow in 1927, and things started to kind of back up a little bit. And she said, well, that's okay. You know, this happens and it'll catch up. But as we all know, looking back, 1929, everything came to a crashing halt. And she was left holding thousands and thousands of acres of land that nobody would ever buy. In addition, Krenn and Dado had helped finance all these mortgages for their new owners, and the new owners couldn't pay. So Edith was told to kick them out and reclaim the properties, but she didn't have the heart to do that. So she was left with those mortgages as well. She died in 1932 of breast cancer, so she did not have a chance to recoup her losses. In the meantime, her father and her brother, who now had the vast majority of the family's wealth, were really reluctant to step in and help. And the family correspondence is really heartbreaking. Edith is begging for help, absolutely begging for help. And Junior and father just keep saying, we regret that it would not be in your best interest for us to provide this assistance. So some of that you can see in the family correspondence was a little bit of, we told you not to do this. We told you not to get involved with this. So there was some of that going on. There was also, I think, a reluctance to involve the Rockefeller family in her business debts, because father and Junior were hearing from the doctor that Edith was dying. Edith was not hearing this because they didn't think she could handle that information. They felt it was best for her not to know how dire her situation was. So they knew she was dying. They didn't want to be left holding the bag.
Well, it seems like such a loss for Chicago that that her collection was sold, and for just pennies on the dollar. Nothing was sold for what it was worth. Obviously, no one had the funds at that point to buy. But it's too bad that her family didn't help salvage any of that.
Yes, I agree. Her one daughter, Muriel, bought whatever she could. She focused mainly on monogrammed items with Edith initials on them. And she bought a few other things, but she really wasn't in a financial situation to buy too much. But yes, everything was broken up, and it was sad for me researching this that there is so little of Edith left here in Chicago, because she gave the land that started Brookfield Zoo. She was one of the founders of Chicago Grand Opera, and she and Harold, they underwrote that to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, which was huge at the time. They started this infectious diseases institute. She developed all this real estate, and there's so little left of her,
including her correspondence. And
yes, including her correspondence.
Or did she diary? Didn't she write every?
She must have, because Carl Jung really would have insisted on that. That was one of the tenets of his practice, was to do that. So a lot of historians believe that her materials were destroyed after her death, that Harold and Junior would have destroyed her papers.
Junior was her brother.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why they did that is a big question. All sorts of possible reasons. I mean, certainly they wouldn't have wanted her patient records to, be out there in the world, all those people that she analyzed over the years. I don't think they would have wanted anything negative about them out there either, about themselves. And as an ex-husband, there's an issue there. And as a brother who has denied her help for the last several years, that's there too. Her beliefs were so different from theirs that, they would have maybe been anxious to erase that. But it was interesting going to the McCormick family archives and the Rockefeller family archives. The collections for the other family members, including the women, are huge, but Edith's files are really slim.
So a challenge for you as an author and historian.
Yes, it was a challenge, but I like that kind of challenge. I love a good scavenger hunt. I love a good jigsaw puzzle, and this was that. This was, I found this article here, or I found this one letter in this little archive in a historical society here in the North Shore, or whatever.
Yeah, well, you chased her story all over the world, right? Didn't you? You traveled to Europe, and did you go to Switzerland?
Yeah. Yes, I did end up in Zurich. I had to visit her old haunts